Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping into a really intense period in ancient China, a time when, well, everything was falling apart. And out of that chaos came some of the most radical ideas ever for how to put a world back together.
So think about that question. Seriously, how do you rebuild a broken world? Because for the thinkers we're talking about during China's Warring States period, this wasn't some abstract thought experiment. This was real life. Their entire world was defined by nonstop war and the feeling that everything had gone completely off the rails. So for over 200 years, the China they knew was just gone. The old dynasty had crumbled. What was left was this patchwork of rival states, all locked in this brutal, nonstop fight for survival. It was basically a free-for-all where the strong just ate the weak. And that kind of chaos, it just screams for new answers. And wow, did they get answers. This incredible burst of creativity and new thinking is famously called the 100 Schools of Thought. It was like every philosopher, scholar, and strategist suddenly had a blueprint, their own unique plan for how to fix their broken world. Okay, so you've probably heard of some of these, like Confucianism and Taoism, but today, we're going to focus on two of the most revolutionary and totally opposite philosophies, Moism and Legalism. You'll see they had completely different ideas about what was wrong with society, and even crazier, different ideas about how to fix it.
I mean, just look at this. It's night and day, right? On one hand, you've got Moism, which believed people were capable of good, that this thing called universal love could actually work. And on the other hand, you've got legalism, which basically said, nope, people are selfish, and the only way to deal with them is through control.
So the Moists, they came up with something truly wild for the time. Their big idea was universal love. They looked around and said, you know what the problem is? It's that we care more about our own family than we do about strangers. That very idea, which was a huge part of Confucianism, they said that was the root cause of all the fighting, from tiny family feuds all the way up to massive wars between states.
And this old story just hits the nail on the head. So there's this tale where Confucius hears about a son who rats out his own father for stealing a sheep. And Confucius is basically like, whoa, not cool. Where I'm from, a son covers for his father. See, that family-first loyalty was exactly what the Moists were trying to tear down. They wanted a love that was for everybody, no exceptions. And here's the thing, the Mahdists weren't just sitting around talking about this stuff. They were hands-on. They actually trained themselves to be experts in defensive warfare. Their whole plan was super practical. Go to the small, weak states and teach them how to defend themselves. If you make it too expensive and too difficult for the big guys to attack, well, eventually they'll realize that war just isn't worth it. And then, maybe they'll have to talk peace.
All right, now let's do a complete 180 and talk about the legalists. These guys looked at the world and just laughed at ideas like love or morality. To them, human nature was simple. We're all selfish. We're all just trying to get more pleasure and less pain. So you can't make people better, you can only control them.
And their formula was as simple as it was brutal. Clear laws plus super harsh punishments equals social order. That's it. The thinking was, people won't follow the rules because they're good, they'll follow the rules because they are terrified of what happens if they don't. It's all about fear.
And when they said absolute, they meant it. The law was for everyone, from the poorest farmer to the highest official. And the punishments were severe. We're not talking a slap on the wrist. We're talking about getting a hand chopped off, or worse, for things that seem minor to us. And at the top of it all was the ruler. The whole state was just a machine to make his will happen. He wasn't bound by morality. He was the source of all law. And this wasn't just some theory they wrote down in a book. One state, the state of Qin, which was kind of on the outskirts of the Chinese world, went all in on legalism. They completely remade their society into this incredibly efficient, single-minded war machine. Every single person, every single resource was aimed at one thing: conquest.
And you know what? It worked. Scary as it was, it worked. By 221 BCE, Qin had crushed all its rivals. Their leader declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, and he immediately started this huge project to force his new, massive territory into one single unified empire.
And a lot of this was just incredibly practical. I mean, think about it. Before Qin, the ruts in the road were different widths in different states, so a cart from one place literally couldn't travel in another. The Qin standardized the width of all axles, they created one currency for everyone, they even standardized how the written language looked. All these changes stitched the empire together and made it actually function. But this obsession with standardization and total control, it wasn't just about physical things like roads and money. The ultimate goal was to standardize thought itself, to eliminate any idea that might possibly challenge the state. And that led to something truly horrifying, an event that has left a scar on Chinese history ever since. The emperor ordered that all the great philosophical books, all the works of Confucius, of Mozi, of all the 100 schools, be gathered up and burnt. And to make sure those ideas died for good, the scholars who had memorized them were rounded up and, according to the histories, buried alive.
So, the legalist experiment seemed like a massive success, right? They did the impossible. They ended centuries of war and created the very first Chinese empire. But this victory, built on such a foundation of control and cruelty, was about to fall apart with, well, unbelievable speed.
Just 14 years. Think about that. After all that bloodshed, all that planning, all that conquest, the all-powerful Qin dynasty lasted for just a little over a decade. It's just stunning. So you have to ask, what happened? How did it all go so wrong, so fast? Well, it turns out, the very system that's perfect for gaining power can be a terrible system for keeping it. Legalism gave the emperor total, absolute power, but it gave him zero moral guidelines on how to use it. So you have this ruler with no checks on his power, and the people are just getting crushed. There was no sense of fairness, no idea that the ruler owed his people anything. It was just endless demands, more taxes, more forced labor for his giant projects, all backed up by those brutal punishments. And eventually, people just couldn't take it anymore. They rose up, and the whole mighty empire just crumbled. You know, this whole story, the idealists versus the pragmatists, the incredible rise and the shocking fall of the Qin, it's so much more than just a history lesson. It's a case study in power and control. And it leaves us with this huge, timeless question that we are still wrestling with today. What's the right balance between order and freedom? Is absolute security really worth giving up everything else?